Morena, Sonya, and tēnā koutou katoa to anyone who's listening to us online today. But we've got together this morning to talk about your exhibition Totally Dark, which opened here at the Dunedin Public Art Gallery on the 7th of August in 2021, after you spent some time with us in Ōtepoti on Residency earlier this year. And while the circumstances of the year obviously made it a bit hard to get together in real life and have this conversation, it's really great to have an opportunity to talk about it today and share some of the thoughts with our visitors who are listening online. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge Creative New Zealand as the funders of the Residency and part of this exhibition. Our team and colleagues here at the Dunedin Public Art Gallery who have put a huge amount of work alongside you into making a really beautiful exhibition experience, and to the Dunedin City Council as our core funders. So with that aside, I think today is a really lovely opportunity to talk about some of the thinking in the exhibition and some of the key works that people have experienced and that we'll show people online in Totally Dark. So perhaps a good place to start is to talk about the research inquiry that got you started with Totally Dark, and those ideas of time and of sleep and rest cycles and the relationships between the internal and external factors of those, which provided you your entry point into the project.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy, and thanks also for acknowledging the team, because it was a really wonderful experience being down there and working with you all. I just want to say that how happy I was with the show, and I'm very grateful for the experience. The research behind the show, I think prior to coming down, I'd started looking into sleep troubles a little bit, sort of the physiology behind impaired sleep, and also the sort of socioeconomic accounting of being restless. I think about rest and labour and the relationship between those two quite a lot. And in some ways, the research, when I got to Dunedin, the beginnings of it was quite humble, I was staying in this very beautiful apartment across the road from the gallery, and it's a church that had been converted to apartments, and all of the windows were stained glass, and so at certain times of the day the apartment would just kind of get cast in these beautiful reds and blues, and so alongside that, with that sort of sleep research in mind, I began thinking about wavelengths and the sort of color of light and how that might affect circadian rhythms, and sort of got into a more kind of imaginative space about what it might mean to be out of sync with clock time. I guess like that idea of the circadian rhythm, even though it sort of started in this kind of humble place, it grew, and it kind of gradually kind of took over the show, and I became really interested in how the body's internal clock kind of comes into conflict with other more regulated ways of measuring time, and accounting for the day. So I guess like the question behind the show was, what would a unit of a day look like if it was disentangled from clock time?
Sure. And so there's quite an interesting relationship within the exhibition between that concept and that experience that you had, and the materiality of the exhibition, and the sort of expression of those ideas through through physical materials in your work, which I think we started talking about when we discussed the sleep metal objects and some of the furniture of the exhibition and the offsite aspects of the show that took place when we opened the exhibition. But perhaps you could talk a little about that material expression of these ideas of sleep and of rest and the promotion of sleep. And
sure. Yeah, I started thinking about the kind of supplements that we use to improve sleep quality, and how they are kind of common metals that we have in our home and work environments. Like I was specifically thinking about magnesium and zinc and copper and iron. Yeah, so I was just kind of thinking about how they might act upon us when, other than sort of ingesting them in tablet form, how they might act upon us in our environments. And yeah, so there's the two kind of sites for the show. There's the main kind of Dunedin Public Art Gallery site, and then there was the smaller off-site part of the project at Favour, and the sleep metal objects are shown across both sites. There's various small works at Favour, as well as one of the stalls, and the stalls are the main kind of sleep metal objects at the DPAG gallery. I think the other way that kind of enters the show is through the Chlorophyll Script, which is at Favour, which is just a short fictional text that I wrote where the protagonist is taking supplements to aid sleep and also administering them to a plant that they're cohabiting with. So it's a sort of over-emphasizing with a plant in your space. So maybe it's easy to more specifically talk to the stalls, since they're in both of the spaces.
Sure.
They're lined with copper. And so, as well as a stall literally providing rest for viewers in the gallery, the copper sort of reinforces that idea of rest. It's a mineral that helps regulate circadian rhythms. And I guess I often think about one of my ways of working is to sort of, I'll often sort of literalize and exaggerate sort of things like this. And I think that's what's happened here. You know, like I wanted to set up a situation where there's a literal kind of molecular transference when someone sits on the copper, that they're picking up kind of traces of the mineral, and, you know, albeit in a, you know, microscopic dosage, but so that sort of sitting on the seats would kind of act like taking a vitamin supplement in a way. Yeah.
Sure. That relationship between copper and supplements that support or relate to your circadian rhythms is quite a nice segue into the work that the sleep metal objects and the stalls in particular sit in front of in part of the exhibition, which is Drift, which is a 2-channel digital video work which was filmed at the time isolation unit at Massey University. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that work and also that context, and I suppose how you were drawn to that site, that research site, and the role it plays in Drift.
Yeah, sure. So Drift, it's all filmed at New Zealand's only time isolation unit, which is a test apartment set up at Massey University in Wellington in their School of Science. And it's an apartment that's set up to be entirely isolated from external chronological markers. So in some ways it's a fairly familiar interior setting, except that it has no windows and it's eerily quiet, and it has no clocks or televisions or, you know, digital media at all that kind of you can read the time by. You know, obviously it's got no sunlight allowing it, you know, getting entry. But the other kind of most dramatic difference is that it has this ceiling, which is like the whole ceiling of the apartment is a gridded light system, which is daylight balanced and entirely programmable. So the other part also included in the apartment is the control room, where the researcher can sit and kind of orchestrate the times and levels of daylight and night time according to any arbitrary means, you know, so nothing to do with what the world is doing outside. So the subjects, it's set up to monitor circadian rhythms outside, you know, when subjects can't calibrate according to sunlight. Yeah, and what has been found is that subjects in this kind of experiment tend to experience a circadian drift. So the unit of a day drifts out to 24 hours and 11 minutes on average. Yeah, so I filmed in there. I used a gimbal and got quite sort of kind of pre-programmed, fairly automated camera movements, which sort of disorientate you in that space, and the sort of the quite non-human movements, you know, they're quite kind of robotic in a way. Yeah, so I became quite interested in that errant 11 extra minutes that you know, that the subjects experienced, you know, like this kind of inconvenient time period for a day. And yeah, I that became the sort of time signature for the show. Like I liked the idea that that the show might operate on a calendar based on a physiological time rather than on a calendar day, you know, a physiological day rather than a calendar day. So that work operates to a really careful schedule, and it has these. The main part of it loops. It is on a 15-minute loop, but there are these two sort of key kind of time position pieces which are part of it, and they mark the gallery opening hours and closing hours, but according to the physiological day rather than the, you know, the calendar day. Yeah, and you can sort of see where you are in that schedule through. There's a small printed calendar that's part of the work, and so you can sort of check where you are in that schedule.
Yeah, it's been a highly desirable part of the exhibition, the scheduling pieces of paper. It's surprising to me actually how engaged people are at trying to kind of figure out through those stacks of paper in the gallery with the schedules on them, or sort of to understand actually what they are, and then actually really kind of find quite a lot of engagement and pleasure in kind of cracking the code of them, and then sort of seeing how they are operating in the space. Yeah, which is actually, maybe that's a good way to talk about 11 extra minutes, or to shift the kind of emphasis over onto that work, because it's been interesting to me watching people in the space and be pulled to the scheduling part of Drift, I think, because there is a tangibility in the text that you're offering, even in a text that's appearing as a written schedule or a printed schedule. Text plays a really important work, and schedules in a different way, I think. In 11 extra minutes, it provides another way for text to operate, or for people to sort of hang an experience of time through the written or visual world, and how they're experiencing that work. So you used a method called the experience sampling method to generate text, which becomes a tool in the work 11 extra minutes. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about that and the genesis of that, and then the role, I suppose, of text as a material thing, in terms of inks, as well as text as a methodology of kind of organizing time, and in that work, how it operates.
Yeah, sure. So there's 3 different types of footage in 11 extra minutes. There's footage of working with biro, like ballpoint pen ink, and then there's like a microscopic analysis, like a depth map of the material of the ink that's sort of gathered through a microscope, and these texts, which kind of give approximate times, and they, as you say, they were gathered through this experience sampling method, and it's a tool, a research tool used by the social sciences, and you sort of, I did it with my phone. A little alarm goes off at kind of randomized intervals. I'd set up some questions for myself to answer, and you have to respond. Like, the key kind of thing about experience sampling is that it's sampling situational data right here, right now, so you don't defer it, and you have to respond quickly and succinctly. And so I was doing this as an exercise throughout the residency, and I guess my interest in it was really as a writing tool, because I write quite a lot, but I've always struggled with sitting down to write something now. So I thought this would be a good way to take the pressure off, really, because you all you have to do is respond, and there's no need for it to be good, there's no need for it to make sense. And I like the idea of kind of catching yourself. I presume everyone does this, but like sometimes I catch some sort of weird linguistic things going on in my head, and I just kind of wanted a way to kind of capture those. They usually just kind of wash over you. So I was interested in it as a writing tool, and I didn't know what would come out of it, but one of the questions I asked myself was to guess what the time is without checking. And obviously, I'm doing it on my phone. There's no sort of scientific rigor to this at all, but that those responses that's what I kind of pulled into that work. And so they were sort of like, it's between this and this, or it feels early, or, and then sometimes, because the intervals between the alarms are randomized, you might get, like 1-2 minutes, two in very close succession, and then not another one for another hour and a half or something. And so, you're in a funny kind of little experiment, being on a residency anyway. And so, I ended up kind of forming this kind of, the way I treated it was almost like a dialogue, even though I was talking to myself. I was the subject and the researcher in that scenario, but I sort of ended up treating it like a dialogue. And I think that kind of you can sort of, like in 11 extra minutes, it feels like I'm talking just to somebody. There's an addressee in the text.
It does have that feeling when you read the text that it is sort of something between an internal monologue and a conversation between two parties that develops a familiarity over time. And kind of track your relationship to your question as it progresses. He's sort of, I guess, like anyone you share a house with, you go through kind of periods where you find them endearing and periods where you find them incredibly frustrating. And but I think the other thing, I guess, to say about that, the way it works in the space is that, so it's a 2-channel work, and one of the channels is on a 5-minute loop and one's on a 6-minute loop. So they start, the times start kind of in agreement. So it'll be sort of about 8 o'clock in both of them. But because the loop is a different duration, they get progressively out of sync. And so those, so eventually one channel might be saying that it's 8 o'clock and one might be saying that it's 11. And they, after 30 minutes, they come back into alignment. So the part of 11 extra minutes that you've made through the biro ink is very site specific to the residency, although very connected to some of the ongoing concerns of your work around your interest in publishing and in writing and in print, and I suppose the material culture of those things, or the material sort of residue of those forms of communication. Perhaps you could talk a little about what's happening with those inks and with those biro passages of the work, and then how that related to the experience or the research sort of experience of the built environment of Ōtepoti Dunedin.
Yeah, sure. So one of the first things I did on the residency was procure some ink from the Otago Daily Times. So I got some of their newspaper printing ink. Like a number of my works in the past have kind of started with newspapers, and I feel like there's a newspaper in the background of this work as well, although it's kind of gone through a process of erasure. So I had the ink, and then I worked with a chemist to transition the ODT ink into ballpoint pen ink. So a lot of the footage in 11 extra minutes is working with the ink once it's turned from newspaper ink into ballpoint pen ink, and then just kind of working with it, writing it, testing it, mixing it. And it's all filmed in the conservation lab at downstairs in the at DPAG, and also in the Dunedin Museum. using their microscopes, which was really fun. So I think what I was interested in was the scale shift between these two types of communications, this very official, high circulation public record of a day, and then the scale shift between that and the more sort of subjective, intimate associations that we have with writing using a ballpoint pen and this kind of more diaristic style text that had the sort of tone of the time approximations in 11 extra minutes has this kind of diaristic feel. So the scale shift between the newspaper publishing and the smaller written handwritten texts was really what was driving that work. So like a sort of replacing, again, it kind of goes back to that accounting for a day, like you're sort of overwriting the factual, objective newspaper day with this much more subjective, messy text, messy diaristic day.
It has a lovely time shift as well in respect to the idea that in the past a newspaper has been a very sort of clear and authoritative way of measuring time, in the notion of like receiving your morning paper, receiving your afternoon paper, and then that collapsing into a daily or a the format changing, or the delivery of a news cycle shifting radically in our lifetimes. I sort of in that work.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
sorry.
I enjoy in that work the interaction between that background newspaper and its presence within the work, and this interaction you're having with your phone, in terms of how it brings together sort of almost the news cycle as another way of measuring the passage of time over a day. Yeah.
Yeah. You just reminded me as well of the way a newspaper can be used to be used as a timestamp in a way, like you would hold up a newspaper to prove that this was the day that you were recording this or taking this photograph. Or
we often find them inside the walls of houses as for the same thing, or as an archival sort of trace of a moment in time. It's a lovely kind of relationship in that work. I think that sort of builds up the more you think about how that work is operating. It's a beautiful thing. And then in the exhibition, it's sort of literally sort of housed within a sculpture that sort of references the mechanics and the architecture of that process of making the newspaper, which is has had a huge presence on the city here, I think, over time, and it's a very successful sculpture. It's a beautiful experience to sort of spend time within, and I quite like that when you layer that then upon the stalls, and the thinking behind the stalls and their materiality, the materiality of the film, of the content of the film, sort of within the architecture of the building. It's a very kind of nuanced experience. Yeah.
Thank you. The facade, the big architectural sculpture is loosely modelled off the facade of the Allied Press building in central Dunedin, and yeah, it ties it, and then the sort of form of the alcoves is echoed in the stills as well. And it's built in such a way that you can sort of sit in the alcoves to view the videos, the films. And yeah, I think about, I guess when I saw that building, I thought that those little alcoves would be, if I was working there, that would be the spot that I would choose to, you know, go steal a moment. And yeah, like you could just sort of like perch on the architecture and have your coffee or your cigarette, you know, get some fresh air. And I quite like those sort of sites within a labour environment where you can sort of steal a moment. Yeah, so kind of, I think often these days we find that labour really encroaches into our rest time, and there's increasingly the divisions between work and leisure, you know, being eaten away or sort of colonized by our work environment or habits. But I also kind of like the opposite of that, or the potential of the opposite of that, that, you know, we might be able to sort of, that taking a rest at work might be kind of a subversive political act in a way, even in a quite a small way. Yeah, so yeah, so I'm sort of attracted to those kind of little architectural moments within a big heavy work site.
Yeah, it seems a bit mean to me, because it's an exhibition that it delivers something very satisfying in its experience. It seems a bit mean to talk about it online, where people aren't having the opportunity to be there in the space. But that's probably a good place for us to end today, and invite people that haven't been able to come down to the exhibition because we're not travelling as much at the moment, to visit the website, and we'll put some more images up as well. And I think you've got images of both parts of the exhibition on your website as well, Sonya. So yeah, I'd like to just say thank you. It's been lovely to talk about the work. It's been lovely to spend time with your work over the last months. I know you haven't got as much time with it as you would have liked, perhaps, but we've really been enjoying having visitors in the exhibition, and spending time with the work. It's a really beautiful exhibition, and a really quite a meaningful place of respite in the gallery, which is perhaps a little subversive. So thank you.